If you're like us, you wonder about where the music you love came from. You may also be curious about what albums your favorite artists and bands listen to. Searching for the answers to these questions set us on a journey we invite you to join. Here at the Sonic Collective, we take turns selecting and listening to influential albums from the past. No genre is off limits.
What did others hear in these albums? What made them so special and influential? How does the album flow as a complete package? And does it stand the test of time and still sound good today?
Our panel of regular dudes who love music share their thoughts about these influential albums. And trust me, some sucked. There are a few albums we had trouble listening to more than once. We also share lots of other musical bits and pieces.
So, if you're looking to learn more about music and rediscover amazing albums that changed the sonic landscape forever, look no further. Join us on our journey as we discuss, dissect, and discover some of the world's greatest albums on thesoniccollective.com. Welcome to the Sonic Collective and another one of our exploratory podcast episodes. In this episode, we'll explore musical supergroups. And what is a supergroup? Well, for us, it's a musical performing group of 3 or more persons whose members have had successful solo careers or are members of other groups or are well known in other musical professions. They come together to form an epic alignment of mighty musical talents. For us, this isn't a duo, and they must have released at least one full-length album. These supergroups can also come from any genre. The term can also sometimes be applied to a group that has no specific preferred genre. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and today we'll touch on a few that fall in all these categories and some in between. So thanks for joining us from Bangkok, Thailand. I'm Scott Coates, and with me is...
Darren Scott from Calgary, Alberta.
So Darren, we're both members of the Sonic Collective, where we do monthly album selections that matter, listen to them, and do reviews of short. And we decided that sometimes we want to dive a bit more in depth to other topics and areas of music. So here we are today with supergroups. So I want to ask you, when is the first time you remember hearing something you kind of knew was a supergroup?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's funny when you asked that of us and we were talking about this episode. It was one really popped in my head right away, and I'm going to kind of call a name. And this guy was my friend's older brother. He went by Chevy. His last name was Chevry, Stephen Chevry. But he introduced me to a lot of classic rock. He was older. I mean, I would have been a kid. This would have been probably early 80s at the most. And there was a band that just came out, and it was called The Firm. And this was Paul Rogers from Free Bad Company, Jimmy Page from Zeppelin and the Yardbirds, Tony Franklin from Whitesnake, and Roy Harper and Chris Slade from Uriah Heep, Man for Man, and even AC/DC. And I didn't know all these guys, but he was just like, you have to listen to this album. It's a super group. And I was like, so that for me, that was really the first time I'd really other bands get together and form another band. Okay. So yeah, that was kind of for me. What about you? What's your first memory?
Interesting, The Firm. I'm going to have to go listen to that because I've never even heard of it. It came late for me. I'm thinking I must have been about 17 years old, and Traveling Wilburys came out. I probably didn't know the music of all the members, but I definitely knew Tom Petty, Roy Orbison, Bob Dylan, George Harrison. Jeff Lynne was probably the only one I didn't really know, but yeah, I bought that CD when it came out and loved it and still love it to this day. So that was the first time I really heard of a supergroup, listened to a supergroup, and probably a pretty damn good place to start. Cause I think as we'll go down this rabbit hole, to me, it's almost only one of the supergroups that really, really worked awesome. So let's maybe have a quick overview of really what supergroups are, Darren. I mean, I think in theory, it seems like a supergroup should be easy to do. I mean, easy to turn out incredible music. I mean, you're just pulling together great people, but in many respects, I think it's maybe the opposite. I think maybe there aren't that many supergroups and they only put out one album and dissolve because they've got so much other stuff going on. And I also suspect it might be a question of almost too many cooks in the kitchen. You put together the most talented people from various bands who are used to being the songwriters and used to being the driving force, and they get what they want in their own groups, put them together. I can just imagine that can be really tough to make work well. How about you?
Yeah, I would agree. And it's funny, we talked about this before too, and it was hard sometimes. And we were discovering like, well, everybody almost came from somewhere and another band. So, but what makes them a supergroup? And I think it was really like you said, more than a duo. We don't want just like, hey, somebody collaborated with somebody, but to understand like these artists were successful before, got together, a group of them put out at least an album, and that it, hopefully it caught the attention of somebody, or maybe for a bad reason sometimes. But yeah, I think it's just, that to try and define what that means. And I think it's going to be different for everybody. Of course, anybody listening to this will probably point out 3 or 4 in the genre they love that we'll never heard of. And even doing my research, I was constantly surprised on what came up when you would type in supergroup. So yeah, that's kind of what I was feeling. Yeah.
Yeah, and what they are and what they aren't. Like when we looked in the definition, some sites listed Zeppelin as a supergroup, or Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons as the first supergroup, or even like Grand Funk Railroad and ABBA. So we're not talking about those ones. But you'd put Bad Company here. I had no idea they were supergroup. Tell us about that one.
Yeah, I mean, well, I didn't either. And that's the thing, is we were doing our research. And I mean, it was Paul Rogers from Free, Mick Rouse from Mott the Hoople, Boz Burrell from King Crimson, can't even say that, and Simon Kirke from Free, and as well. And they all got together and formed Bad Company. And yeah, I mean, they had some hit songs, but I think at the time it was just, I had no idea that they were a supergroup.
Yeah. So a couple other examples just to get our listeners' heads around supergroups is we had no idea that Journey was apparently a supergroup. You had Greg Rowley and Neil Schon, sorry about the mispronunciation, both from Santana. And then another guy, George Tickner from Frumious Battersnatch, which I don't know. But then you have Ross Valerie from Steve Miller Band and Prairie Prince from The Tubes. So, I mean, Journey was a supergroup. And then a pretty famous one, Derek and the Dominoes. So, I mean, Eric Clapton from the Yardbirds and Cream. You had Bobby Whitlock, Carl Ratty, Jim Gordon, all from Delaney and Bonnie. And then Dwayne Allman. I didn't know he was in it, from the Allman Brothers Band. So bands like that, I didn't really know were a supergroup, but now you read the other bands they came from, you're like, wow. So look, to kick things off, we thought, let's give some examples of supergroups in various genres. Why don't you kick us off in a pretty classic rock example, Darren?
Yeah, classic rock. I think, and you just mentioned Derek and the Dominoes, but the same member, Cream, you have Eric Clapton that came from them and the Yardbirds, right. Ginger Baker, the Graham Bond organization, and he had done a lot of other stuff with different bands as well, and Jack Bruce from Man for Man. And I think the signature songs, White Room, Sunshine of Your Love, and I'm So Glad. I mean, they were a very, very successful band, especially in that time. And they had their issues as well, but they're interesting and so successful. And then, if we kick it over to, say, the countryside, what would you say the supergroup there?
I think the best one we kind of came up was with the Highwaymen, Johnny Cash, Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings, and Chris Christopherson. They put out quite a number of albums, but signature songs, Highwayman, Desperados, Waiting for a Train, Silver Station. I mean, all 4 of these guys are mega country legends on their own. And
how drunk and high were they making that album?
Exactly, how high. But they made a few albums, right? So, I mean, this is an example, I think, of guys that are genuine friends. And that's what probably brought them more together than some supergroups that kind of come together because they're looking to make a supergroup. I just reckon these guys, enjoyed each other's company. And there's a big one in folk. What would you say in folk there, Darren?
Yeah, I think probably one everybody will think of right away is Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. I mean, David Crosby from the Byrds, Graham Nash from the Hollies, Stephen Stills from Buffalo Springfield, and then, of course, our good old Canadian boy Neil Young from Buffalo Springfield. And, and they all had been doing some solo stuff as well. I mean, their signature songs are Ohio and Teach Your Children, Carry On, Deja Vu. I mean, in that genre, well respected, and they had a massive following in the 70s there when they were putting out their albums. Yeah, really amazing.
That's a mega one.
Yeah, and I guess to kind of jump, next genre, and this one we had the hard time with was rap, and I love rap, and we both kind of struggled. And I thought, I'll find some easy, but lots of duos, which we're trying not to do, like Black Star, even like Run the Jewels, new band who I love, but or Watch the Throne by Jay-Z, Kanye. It's like, I'd almost argue, and people might not, but Wu-Tang Clan, people will say, well, they weren't really much before, but I think they all did have pretty decent solo careers. Some of them were a little more successful than others, but then when they formed Wu-Tang, that I think people argue that they're not a supergroup, but yeah, I mean, that was kind of what came up in there. And then even on the, I guess the hip, more soul is kind of like Shalimar that had Jodie Watley and yeah, who I liked, she was great in the 80s. Yeah, I guess, from there. So, I mean, there's some examples of some super groups. And again, it's interesting because we're still struggling in some genres to really define what it is. Yeah. So, I mean, kick it over to you.
Yeah. So hip hop is kind of, I would agree, from what we researched, a bit of a black hole, not very well known for supergroups, although it seems no hip hop artist can put out a song these days without it featuring somebody, but that's still under two people. We're not talking about a whole band. So now we're going to get into these are kind of personal choices, looking through supergroups, some that we thought didn't work well, worked pretty well, and worked really well. And the first one I'll throw out there is Tin Machine. This was David Bowie, Reeves Gabriel from David Bowie's bands later, The Cure, Tony Sales, who played with Todd Rundgren, Iggy Pop, Hunt Sales, same thing, Iggy Pop, Todd Rundgren, and some others, and Eric Schermerhorn, which also Iggy Pop. So like on paper, works great. I can't profess that I've listened to these albums often. I've listened to, there was 2 Tin Machine albums, I think. But like, boy, they didn't really grab me. I get a feeling these guys did it for themselves and not others, but didn't really work. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I wasn't the biggest Tin Machine fan at all. Even though I gotta love Bowie and anything Iggy Pop does, I usually love. I realize Iggy Pop's not in it, but David Bowie and him were so connected, and obviously they probably met these musicians through that. I think, going to another one, and it's actually funny this band didn't work, but Chickenfoot, which is hilarious. But, it's Sammy Hagar, obviously from Van Halen solo and Montrose, but Joe Satriani, like he's known as one of the best guitarists of our era, really. Played with Mick Jagger. He was played in Deep Purple, but his solo career is unbelievable. And Michael Anthony from Van Halen and Chad Smith, the drummer from the Chili Peppers. And you're like, man, this band's going to be great. And they just, it seemed like garbage. And, anytime I went back even for this review and just was not digging them. And they are known to be ranked one of the worst supergroups of all time. Unfortunately, sorry guys, but hey, they're laughing. I don't think they care.
It's a good example. We're bringing, again, some of the biggest names of rock. Like you look at that on paper, you're like, oh, it's got to be great. But it is just pure cheese. Like I remember is really, really bad. And another one on paper that works well, but I remember I thought was a super turd, was Super Heavy. One album only, released in 2011. A.R. Rahman, more a kind of a producer-composer out of India. Damian Marley, Bob Marley's son. Dave Stewart, Rhythmics, Joss Stone, and Mick Jagger. But I listened to that album a couple times. Yeah, but it just doesn't work. I really thought it was bad. How about another one from you?
Yeah, I mean, the Power Station, it's funny. They are sometimes on one-sided for being good and for being bad. And I got to admit, like, I didn't mind a couple of their songs when they came out in the 80s. But it was Robert Palmer, Tony Thompson, and John and Andy Taylor from Duran Duran. So, I mean, more pop kind of driven, light rock, but they had a few hits, but it just didn't work. It's a little too poppy cheesy maybe for me.
Yeah. One that I also think is a lead balloon and is an absolute turd. It just strikes me as like egos, but I don't think they care. They're just doing it to play live. Hollywood Vampires, 2015 album, Alice Cooper, Johnny Depp, and Joe Perry from Aerosmith. They have all kinds of rotating people that come in, but like, man, it was tough getting through that one. And then the next one we have, the final one on this list, is kind of interesting because we didn't realize it was a supergroup, right?
Yeah. I was just goofing around, and I think I mentioned, I'm like, hey, didn't the Honey Drippers have Robert Plant from Zeppelin? And then we're like, oh, it's probably not a supergroup, though. We just thought it was that. But then when we looked into it, we found out, Jimmy Page was there from Zeppelin. Yeah. And, for a bit. And Jeff Beck, a former Yardbirds member. And then they had other friends and well-known studio musicians, including the former guitarist from Judas Priest, Ernest Chataway. And I was like, oh, wow, like that was a super group.
And Paul Schaefer.
Oh yeah, Paul Schaefer. And but it was pretty cheesy fucking music, especially like you're thinking Robert Plant, like Led Zeppelin, and he's mellowing out a bit. This is a little bit later in the 80s, but come with me.
So let's talk about a few super groups that we think worked pretty well. And I'll admit some of these I actually really like, but we're putting them in the pretty well category. One that I'm going to throw out there, like I'm putting them in pretty well. I really enjoy them, but you compare them to where they came from, and it's almost impossible to top their original bands. But Prophets of Rage came out, I believe, in 2017, and it's the three guys from Rage Against the Machine who will just keep coming up, and in many ways, like the drummer, the bass player, the guitar player, they've always continued to play together. It's only the Zach De La Rocha who ever left that band. So you had the three guys from Rage Against the Machine, Tom Morello, Tim Commerfeld, and Brad Wilk. And then you had DJ Lord from Public Enemy, Chuck D from Public Enemy, and Be Real from Cypress Hill. And I think they were all just looking to keep playing, keep doing something. They put out one album. The songs were sticking it to the man again. And, I think half the album's quite to very good. So I enjoyed it. What do you think, Darren?
Yeah, I'd agree with you on Prophets of Rage there, and I really respect what they did, and I'm glad they came out. But a similar band to that, I'd say, would be Velvet Revolver, which a couple songs are really fantastic, but the same kind of category. Does all the songs, half the album's kind of not that great. And I mean, that was Scott Weiland from Stone Temple Pilots, Slash from Guns N' Roses, obviously, Duff McKagan from Guns N' Roses, Matt Sorum from Guns N' Roses, and he was in the Cult too. Dave Kushner from Wasted Youth, so really talented and a lot there. But I mean, Scott Weiland's a freaking mess, as we know. So you could probably see when you were talking earlier about, is there too many cooks or too many drugs and too much, shit, like I could just see why that band fell apart. Just didn't quite work.
Yeah, I'll admit I liked both those albums and I still listen to them, but like the quality of the songwriting of the songs just isn't up to the other bands. But I do love it's got to be one of the greatest fuck you names, because at that time I think those guys wanted to keep Guns N' Roses going, but Axl was so hard to work with. So Guns N' Roses, you come up with Velvet Revolver, like it's almost the same name, right? I really love what they did there. Same band, kind of, the three guys from Rage, but then Chris Cornell from Soundgarden, like Audio Slave. They had 3 albums. Again, I had almost put this in the worked really well because I liked it, but they weren't big commercial success. And I got to be in the right mood to listen to it. It's kind of pretty heavy, different music. But Audio Slave to me was one that worked reasonably well. 3 albums. Yeah,
I really like them too, but I can see why others might not. But that was my jam. That was my jam. I think Cream is in here in this one too. I mean, obviously a very popular band and known as one of the best, but same thing. Not everybody loves Cream. It's definitely a style, 70s style and feel. The musicianship in it is excellent, obviously, like Ginger Baker's drum playing to Clapton's guitar and is crazy. But at the same time, I think it's just maybe not as approachable for some people. So I can see why people might struggle with it, but it is an amazing band.
I'm going to quickly go over 2. One of them, like, I got to admit, I'm not a fan of the album, but Hunger Strike's a great single. Temple of the Dog, just to look at the names from later, Chris Cornell, Eddie Vedder, Stone Gossard from Pearl Jam, Jeff Ament from Pearl Jam, and then Mike McCready from Pearl Jam. Like, it was one album. It gets high on the list. I didn't listen to it much. But one I really like, again, I got to be in the right mood, and God, I hope they do another album. It's been 10 years. Is Dave Grohl, Josh Homme from Queens of the Stone Age, Eagles, Death Metal, Kais, and John Paul Jones, Zeppelin. 10 years ago, they knocked out an album, and like, there's none of those obvious radio hits on it, but I like the whole album start to finish. So that's another one I'll put in the like worked pretty well category, but on a personal thing, I mean, I love all those guys, really liked it. And then I see you have an interesting one here as the last in that category.
Yeah, I added in, and just for the research for this, one thing I did, I searched on Spotify playlist, just like Supergroups playlist, and I was listening to one, and Asia came up and Heat of the Moment. And I was like, oh, again, this kind of falls into that. I didn't know they were a supergroup band, and maybe I should have, but it was John Wetton from King Crimson, Steve Howe from Yes, Jeff Downs from Yes and the Buggles, love the Buggles, and Carl Palmer from Emerson, Lake and Palmer. I was like, oh, wow, yeah, that's pretty epic lineup. And Asia went on to record. They were super popular. They might even be in the category that supergroup probably outsold the rest of their solo and other bands. Well, maybe not, but they would be close. I guess Yeses.
I'll admit it. I know Asia, and what I remember is seeing their album covers, which were always epic drawings of like a goddess hugging a dragon or something. But like, I don't know their songs. I know Heat of the Moment now that you put it here, but like the Asia band, the name seems bigger to me. Yes was pretty big. The Buggles, the first video ever played on MTV. Video played Killed the Radio Star was the first video on MTV.
Yeah, that's funny. And it's funny when if you go to Asia, just plug it in and look at their hits, you'd be like, oh yeah, I know that one. I know that. A little pop rocky for sure, but in their time, I guess late 70s, 80s. And but they just pounded out the hits for a while there.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to slide into supergroups that we think were great, right? Like these are ones that are really, really good. And we're going to re-mention some that we mentioned earlier in this podcast. But for me, Traveling Wilburys, George Harrison, I mean, Beatles, Bob Dylan, Tom Petty, Jeff Lynne, who was in Electric Light Orchestra, was his big one, more producer, Roy Orbison. I mean, God, you have 5 absolutely freaking incredible artists. My understanding is that George Harrison was recording an album, and I think Tom Petty and maybe Jeff Lynne walked by, and he's like, hey, can you guys, play something on this one track? And he had Handle with Care as, I think, a B-side. And it just went so well, they called up some other buddies. It was total accidental. And their second album came out after Roy Orbison had died. They'd already recorded the songs. But these 2 albums, to me, like there's not a bad song on either of these albums. And they stand up really, really well.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, I 100% back you up. To me, this is my most favorite supergroup that, The Firm was the first one I remember. The Traveling Wilburys came a few years later, and I think have been since then what I've defined as a supergroup. Yeah, they're amazing.
Why don't you take us into one?
Yeah, I think I'm going to go into one that is I really like, and I really like this artist, Jack White. But the group is The Dead Weather, and it's funny. I'm a big fan, so I kind of discovered The Dead Weather just by following Jack White and really like them. And that's Alison Mosshart from The Kills and Discount. Dean Fertitta. I can't even say it. Fertitta. From Queens of the Stone Age. Jack Lawrence from the Raconteurs and the Greenhorns. And then Jack White is mentioned. And oh man, it is just a masterpiece of kind of new modern alt rock. It's just, it's dynamite. It's just such a good album. And actually, I'll just kind of skip into the next one because I also think that the Raconteurs, which are Jack White again, but then Patrick Keller from the Greenhorns, Brendan Benson from the Greenhorns, Jack Lawrence from the Greenhorns, and then Dean Fertitta again. Fertitta. I'll just say it every way. And then he just tours with them, but he will play with them. But Jack White just has this magical touch, like a lot of artists. Well, not a lot, some, only very few have. But those 2 groups to me are just dynamite. And I just listened to the new Raconteurs album. I just bought it. It's dynamite.
Well, actually, on the Raconteurs front, there's a recent Spotify YouTube documentary. It's about an hour long. Follows the Raconteurs playing, and that's worth watching. It's pretty cool. One of my favorite all-time rock bands, I didn't even realize until my last pass through the outline for this show that this is a supergroup. Foo Fighters. I think Dave Grohl, Scream, Nirvana, Pat Smear, The Germs, Nirvana, Nate Mendel, Sunny Day Real Estate, The Fire Theft, William Goldsmith, original member, Sunny Day Real Estate, The Fire Theft, Taylor Hawkins played with Sass Jordan and Alanis Morissette on her Jagged Little Pill album, an original member, Frank Stahl from Scream and Wool, Chris Shiflett, who came in and replaced Frank Stahl, No Use for a Name, Me First, and the Gimme Gimmes, and then Rami Jaffe, who had played with them on keyboards for years, but became an official member, Wallflowers, and Pete Yorn. So Foo Fighters, 25 years they've been around now, but man, every person in that is truly from their own legit band. So I think they're one of the super groups people don't think of.
Yeah. And I think that's an interesting example in this one, because you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that how there could be a lot of personality conflicts, or maybe that's why they don't work sometimes. I think for the Foo Fighters, I think that's Dave Grohl did that right. He kind of came in and he definitely set the tone that it was his band and that he would kind of run it, and then brought in these amazing musicians. But I think that's kind of what made it work, is that he kind of took that away. He's like, maybe it's his ego a little bit, but he's like, no, this is my band. You do things kind of my way, and we'll go from there. But it's been very successful, so I'll give a nod to that.
Yeah, and he obviously must have a staff meeting when people start playing with him. Like, I'm the main singer-songwriter, like, don't rock the boat too much. Because I've heard interviews, I think even with Chris Shiflett, where he mentions like, oh, Dave writes most of the songs. But I think reason people fell out, like, for example, William Goldsmith, he just didn't like his drum playing. So on The Color and the Shape, If you ever watch Foo Fighters Back and Forth, like Dave Grohl
Mhm.
secretly re-records all the drum tracks on that and says to William, like, I still want you in the band, but basically acknowledges like the drumming just wasn't good enough. And like Franz Stahl, I think because Dave Grohl had been in his band Scream as a junior member and Franz was kind of like the leader, I think Franz came in thinking like, yeah, I'm going to write the songs and be a songwriter too. And that just didn't work. So he got moved out of the band. So yeah, I mean, you nailed that one. It's an interesting dynamic and it can't be easy to make it work.
No, it definitely can. Yeah, there are so many personalities.
Yeah. So kind of wrapping up this topic, I mean, this was a really fun rabbit hole to go down. I thought I knew a lot of supergroups. I didn't. I discovered there's a lot of groups that I didn't know that supergroups that are. I learned, I think that like somehow supergroups haven't really carried over to rap and R&B very well or successfully. And then the larger surprise is that very, very, very few supergroups I think actually are very good and stand the test of time. So, ones that I think like what supergroups surpassed the original solo or group efforts, like Foo Fighters to me rank in there. I mean, I like Nirvana and that, but I kind of think they're one of those bands that like had Kurt Cobain not killed himself, would they have continued to put out great albums? I don't necessarily think so. So Foo Fighters I'll put up there. I mean, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. I mean, it's all those, the members are beyond respected in their own thing. And I mean, again, Traveling Wilburys awesome, but like, can you say they were better than the artists on their own? But I'd say I'd probably put Foo Fighters up at the top. How about you, Darren?
Yeah, it's funny. I touched on it earlier, but I just know for a fact in the research that Shalimar way past any of their previous band's efforts, and they were super successful. Now, I mean, it was a little more poppy soul stuff in the '80s that most people won't remember, but again, I'm still going to come back to Wu-Tang too. I don't care. I'm calling them a supergroup, and I think Wu-Tang together. Any Wu-Tang fans will. And I agree. As much as you might love the individual albums that came out after with all the artists, I think Wu-Tang as a group was, nothing to mess with. Let's put it that way. Yeah, and I mean, it's some we're not even sure, but maybe is Cream in there, right? Like, did Cream outsell the Yardbirds and Derek and the Dominoes? Probably,
maybe.
So they might be in there. Yeah.
Okay. I want to wrap this thing up with a dream supergroup we'd love to see. And I see yours now, but you've picked someone that's already passed away. So I thought we were going with living guys, but it doesn't matter. So my supergroup I'd love to see would be Dave Grohl. He could be guitars and vocals, some vocals. Then we'd have Brian Johnson from AC/DC, who would be vocals. Brad Wilk from Rage Against the Machine on drums. We'd have Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers on bass. And we get Jimmy Page in there for guitars as well. I can't imagine. Wow, what would they come up with, right? Unbelievable.
Yeah, no shit.
How about your dream supergroup?
Okay, well, I'm going to change it on the fly because I was bad at listening to instructions. Well, the original
there was no instructions. To be fair, there wasn't.
Okay. All right. Then I'll just leave it. So I left it. Two of my guys are dead, but I have Neil Peart on drums from Rush, nice. John Entwistle from The Who on bass, freaking nice. Phenomenal. And just a mess. So this is sounding like it's going to be a classic rock, prog rock thing, but no. Then I throw in Iggy Pop on vocals and Tom Morello on guitar. I just want to see what that group would come out with. If they could just get together in a room and just say, let's make music, I would love to freaking see that.
Can't imagine. Yeah. And we will never know.
Yeah, I purposely did it. But when I die, I'll make them perform as angels.
A lot of fun having this conversation. Darren and I have made a list of some musical topics we'd like to explore more. So I think maybe every month to 2 months, you can expect kind of one of these focused episodes to come out just when we're feeling inspired. And hopefully you enjoy these too. Remember to check out the show notes on thesoniccollective.com because we'll have links to a lot of the stuff we talked about. And also the first episode in this series, What Makes a Great Album with legendary music man, Alan Cross. Make sure you listen to that. So thanks very much for listening. Darren, why don't you take us out of this thing?
Yeah, thanks so much, everybody. I really enjoyed this. I hope you did too. We'd always like to know what your favorite supergroup is on our website or anywhere else. You can leave comments. Be sure to check us out on your favorite podcast platform, and we're always available at thesoniccollective.com. For now, I'm Darren Scott, and he's
Scott Coates.